Good morning. Today is the 5th of Cheshvan and the 20th of October. Before we continue, I want to remind or tell anybody who doesn't know that I am still scheduled to travel to Los Angeles on Tuesday, on the 24th, and I'll be teaching there all week, including a Shabbaton at Oxnard, and then Sunday at the Beverly Hills Municipal Gallery, we will have a mini course on the road to self-fulfillment. You can get all the information either by the link that will be in the comments of this video in the next few days, or you can just stop by and try to make it. Okay, so we are up to the 6th and 7th readings of Parshat Noach, and I would like to read to you directly from what we wrote about this week in the issue of Wonders. In the 7th reading, we read about the Tower of Babylon, or the Tower of Babel, as it's called, and the Torah says like this: They said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top shall reach the sky. Let us make ourselves a name, so that we will not scatter all over the face of the earth." This idea that they wanted to make themselves a name, since the Torah says that this is what they said, so it actually did happen. And they have a name. What is their name? Their name to today, until this day, is called the generation of the dispersion, Dora Pelaga. Dispersion because the aftermath of trying to build this tower, and not for the true sake of bettering humanity and deepening its commitment to peace and goodness, but rather to make themselves a name and actually to fight God, to fight the goodness. The aftermath was that they were dispersed by all their languages being mixed up. And years ago, I was studying in the Department of Archaeology at Hebrew U, and I remember seeing an article that I don't have the ability to go there again and search for it, and it was anyway a needle in a haystack, but it was a very interesting article that was written sometime in the 80s, I believe, which argued that what archaeologists have discounted all these years about chapter 10 in Genesis, which describes the dispersion of the nations, is actually the best starting point for understanding the dispersion of nations today and exactly what happened historically and why the world is the way it is. But that is just an aside. There are two other generations in the Torah, in the entire Bible actually. The Bible, first of all, you should know, there's a very interesting question you can ask. How many generations does the Bible describe? Most people don't know the answer to that question because how do you even count? It's very difficult. But if you actually get down to it, you'll find that the Bible covers exactly 64 generations, from Adam until a person called Anani. And the amazing thing is that 64 is the value of Adam and Eve together in Hebrew. Adam Chava. Adam is 45 and Eve is 19. So those 64 generations are actually the generations of Adam and Eve. In all 64 generations that the Bible covers, it only gives a name to 3 generations. The first generation is also in our Parsha, in Parshat Noach, the generation of the flood. It's called Dor Hamabul. Then there's the generation of the dispersion, which is in the 7th reading today, Dora Pelaga. And then there's only one more generation, which is the generation of Jews that left. First of all, the first 2 generations are not Jewish. They are universal generations. They're made out of mankind. The third and last is a generation that came out of Egypt. It's called Dor De'ah, or Dor Midbar. It has 2 names, either the generation of consciousness, because they became conscious of God, or they're called the generation of the wilderness, because they traveled through the wilderness for 40 years. And that basically covers the rest of the Torah from Exodus all the way to the end of Deuteronomy. Now, these three generations, because they're so particular and they're only ones that are given a name by the sages, in Kabbalah they're described as being archetypes of all the generations that came afterwards. In other words, there is a simple concept that every generation that you're in is one of these three. And the rectification of the souls of these generations continues on throughout human history. And so this brings us to a question: how should we define them? How should we look at them? So one of the interesting ideas is that if the last generation, the third one, is called the generation of de'ah, of consciousness, of knowledge, then the first two are wisdom and understanding, meaning that they correspond to the three intellectual faculties. And the order would be that the generation of the flood is wisdom, the generation of the dispersion is understanding, and the generation of the wilderness, the generation of knowledge, is knowledge. Now, let's just explain the correspondence. The fact that the generation of the flood is wisdom is very simple to understand, even on the face of it. Water is always likened to wisdom, or wisdom is likened to water. So that's a simple connection. But the connection runs a lot deeper, as we'll see, as we want to see here. There's a very famous statement from the Zohar that says that in the 600, based on the verse in our parsha, that in the 600th year of Noach's life, the abyss opened and the windows of the heaven opened, and the waters came from above and from below. And the Zohar says that in the 600th year, and according to the commentaries on the Zohar, it's talking about the 600th year of the 6th millennium, there will be a flood in the world. A flood of what? Waters from the abyss, waters coming from below. Again, water is wisdom. So there will be wisdom coming from below, and there will be an effluence of wisdom coming from above, water coming from above. Says the Zohar, this is the unification of the waters that are above the firmament and the waters that are below the firmament. And the 600th year of the 6th millennium is exactly 1840. So this becomes a very important year in Jewish thought, the year in which, let's call it mundane wisdom, science, everything that comes from studying the mundane opened up, and a flood of wisdom entered the world, and at the same time a flood from above, the divine wisdom, was beginning to be revealed. Meaning everything that had been held, let's call it in secret or concealed or not shared with everyone for a very good reason, which I will talk about hopefully in California next week. Very good reason why this was not revealed before. In the same way that resurrection of the dead was not revealed before, in the same way that the world of souls, the afterlife, was not revealed before. There's very good reasons for all these things. So they will be revealed. It will become a time when everyone becomes aware of the divine wisdom above, and it will unify with the mundane wisdom from below. We actually have a book on that called, strangely enough, maybe it's called Wisdom, unifying the science and Torah, and what it means exactly. I think actually we called it conversion, converting or connecting science and Torah. In any case, the second generation, the dispersion, corresponds to the sphere of understanding. And why is that? Because if we would ask a very simple question, how are we to study what happened during the time of the dispersion? We'd say, like academically, if we wanted to study this, where would it go? So we would say this is obviously belongs in the linguistic department, because the main thing that happened was that languages were formed. Languages began to develop from one another. So this belongs in the linguistic department, and it's a very interesting thing that language is associated today scientifically with the left lobe of the brain. In fact, probably the primary function of the left lobe is language. There's a lot more about this in this week's Wonders I don't want to get into it. Finally, the generation of knowledge is, again, it's very self-explanatory, that they came to consciousness of God. Now, the amazing thing is that Rav Ginsburg says about this, that our generation, the current generation, which is the generation of the redemption, is not one of the three. It's actually all three together. Meaning, whatever has not yet been rectified from these three generations, whatever souls have not yet been rectified, this is like the last chance. So our generation contains all of them. And one of the ways that you can see this is that we talked about the flood of knowledge, but what about the dispersion? So you can look at the dispersion not as necessarily something negative, because the point that we said, they tried to build a tower of Babel, a tower that would be the concerted effort of all of humanity. And Rabbi Ginsburg says this is our generation. The true thing that our generation is tasked with is cooperation in such a way that we can build not the Tower of Babel, which was meant to be an affront to God and to fight against goodness, but rather the true Tower of Babel, which is the true purpose of our working together to try to build something that has everlasting value. And that is the spirit of cooperation, the true spirit of cooperation that needs to be between people of goodwill, between nations that understand the value of the good, that understand the value of pursuing knowledge and pursuing morality, and all these things that we so yearn for, and pursuing peace. And finally, the generation of knowledge is obviously exactly this, that this is the generation in which we are tasked with sharing the knowledge of Torah, sharing it with the entire world as the catalyst that can make these things happen. The higher wisdom and the lower wisdom connecting together, meaning higher wisdom is obviously from Torah, but there is a general sense in humanity that there is higher wisdom. There have been many mystics in many cultures that have felt this calling. This is not something that is in some way unique to the Jewish people, because if it was, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, because there would be no point. You don't go to dolphins to talk to them about something that they don't understand. Everything that we say is because we feel that inherently every moral person understands these things, except that, like the way that we developed it, there has to be an effluence from above. There has to be a, let's call it a rectification of knowledge, of understanding, so that we do it the right way, so that we understand God the right way, and that can only come from above. It can only come from the Torah. And finally, when it comes together, the Torah then serves, the teaching of the Torah, the knowledge, this flood of knowledge works because we have a deep consciousness, a deep feeling that there is a relationship between the Jewish people and the nations of the world. It's called the generation of the wilderness. This is something we didn't have room for in Wonders. The generation of the wilderness, I believe we've spoken about this before. In Ezekiel, there is a promise, there is a prophecy, that before the final redemption, it's as if God says, I will take you out into the wilderness again. And what he means by that is the wilderness of the nations. The wilderness of the nations is the contact, the connection that can be formed with those nations of the world who are searching for something that will bring peace and prosperity to everyone. And so the Kabbalah describes this as the Mashiach taking the Jews, as it were, out for a spin around the entire world, teaching the teachings of Torah to bring everyone together. So these are our three generations as they are in this generation that we're in. There's a lot more in the issue of Wonders. I hope that everybody can find a way to download it. Thank you very much for joining, and good Shabbos, and we should be able, hopefully, to meet in good times. And I hope to see whoever can come next week in Los Angeles. All the best.